Your fiancé put something in your son's food. The shout rips through the exclusive private dining room like a gunshot. 6-year-old Minjun Soo slides from his chair, his small body convulsing violently as crystal glasses shatter across pristine white linen. His eyes roll back. His lips turn blue. Time stops. Korean Mafia boss James Soo drops to his knees. His hands that have broken bones, hands that have ended lives, now trembling as they lift his seizing son. His voice shattering as he screams Minjun's name again and again. No response. Around them, the world fractures. Bodyguards freeze mid-movement, hands instinctively reaching for concealed weapons. Someone gasps. Someone steps back in terror. And there she stands, Joanna, draped in her champagne-sequined gown, face drained of color but chin raised, calculating even in this moment of exposure. Her hands shake, not with shock, but with something darker, the tremor of someone whose carefully constructed plan is unraveling in real time. But every eye in the room turns to her, Erica Matthews, the Black American waitress in her simple uniform, hand still pointing, body shaking violently. She knows what she's just done. In Seoul's underground, you don't accuse a mafia boss's woman and live to see sunrise. James Soo slowly looks up from his dying son. His eyes, killer's eyes that have sent men to their graves with a glance, lock onto Erica. At that moment, she's signed her own death warrant. Unless she's telling the truth. In that frozen instant, power, love, betrayal, and a child's life hang by a single breath. Before we dive into the story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Have you ever witnessed someone speak truth to power, knowing it could cost them everything? And don't forget to subscribe. We share powerful stories of courage, redemption, and choices that change everything. Before the scream, before the hospital lights, before fear carved permanent lines into the face of Seoul's most dangerous man. James Soo had a life that most people only glimpsed from a distance, and that distance was intentional. By 38, James Soo was the kind of man whose name alone moved rooms. Not because of fame, because of fear. He controlled Seoul's underground empire with calculated precision. Gambling dens hidden beneath luxury hotels, protection rackets woven through legitimate businesses, smuggling operations that moved everything the law said shouldn't exist. His network stretched from Busan to the DMZ, invisible but absolute. Newspapers didn't write about him. Police didn't investigate him. Politicians didn't oppose him. Because James Soo had built something more powerful than wealth or weapons. He built a system where everyone who mattered either worked for him, owed him, or feared what would happen if they crossed him. But James Soo had a secret that would have destroyed his reputation if his enemies knew. Every morning at 5 a.m., before the city woke, before his empire demanded blood, he stood in a kitchen making a 6-year-old's breakfast. Because the most dangerous man in Seoul was terrified of one thing, failing his son. But none of that mattered when he went home. At home, James Soo wasn't a mafia boss. He was just a father. Every morning, he woke before dawn, not for strategy meetings or territory disputes, but because Minjun liked his breakfast a specific way. Rice soft, egg perfectly steamed, cut fruit arranged by color because the 6-year-old said it tasted better organized. James tied his son's school uniform tie himself, even though bodyguards waited outside with bulletproof cars and enough firepower to start a small war. His fingers that had pulled triggers, that had signed execution orders, moved gently, carefully, as they straightened the small collar. "You don't have to do everything yourself, father," Minjun once said, his voice serious beyond his years, dark eyes studying James's face. "You have people." James had smiled then, but his chest tightened, because once he hadn't been alone. Minjun's mother, Sun Hee, had been the only person who truly knew James Soo. Not the legend, not the monster, but the man beneath. She'd believed in him back when his empire was nothing more than a street corner and a knife. She'd laughed easily, cutting through his darkness with light he didn't know he needed. She loved fiercely, without conditions, without fear. And one brutal night 5 years ago, she paid the price for loving him. The rival gang's retaliation was swift and merciless, a message written in blood. Sun-hee never came home from the market. The phone call came instead, clinical and cold, changing everything. Min-jun was barely 1 year old, too young to understand death, but old enough to feel the absence. He cried for his mother for months, small body shaking in the darkness. James would sit on the edge of the bed, holding that tiny, trembling form, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "I'm here. I won't let anyone hurt you. I'll make the world safe for you." From that moment forward, James poured everything into his son. Love, protection, control, perhaps too much of all three. He surrounded Min-jun with armed bodyguards disguised as drivers and tutors. He bought the safest house in Seoul, a fortress with cameras, reinforced walls, panic rooms. He vetted every teacher, every friend's parent, every person who came within 50 feet of his son. But he couldn't vet away the loneliness. People noticed. At family gatherings, the few James still attended, whispers followed him like shadows. A man like James Soo shouldn't raise a child alone. The boy needs a mother figure. Min-jun needs softness. He's growing up surrounded by guns and fear. Even Elder Kong, one of James's senior advisors, spoke carefully one evening over tea. "Boss," he said, his weathered face grave, "loneliness is a cage that locks from the inside. The boy feels it, even if you don't." James said nothing. He stared at his hands that had built an empire but couldn't hold back grief. He wasn't against love. He just didn't trust it anymore. Love had gotten Sun-hee killed. Love had made him vulnerable. And in his world, vulnerability was death. That was when Joanna entered his life. They met at Club Azure, one of those exclusive establishments where Seoul's elite played at being dangerous and the dangerous played at being elite. James attended out of obligation, a meeting with a supplier who preferred champagne to boardrooms. Joanna approached him directly. That alone should have been a warning. Most people kept their distance from James Soo. They waited to be summoned, afraid to presume. But Joanna walked right up to him, champagne glass in hand, wearing confidence like armor. She was stunning, elegantly dressed, hair styled in perfect waves, movements calculated for maximum effect. But it was her eyes that caught James's attention. They didn't flinch when she looked at him. No fear, no hesitation. "You're James Soo," she said, not a question. "And you're either very brave or very foolish," he replied. She smiled. "Perhaps both." They talked. She was intelligent without trying to prove it, sophisticated without being pretentious. She asked about his legitimate businesses, carefully avoiding his darker operations. She laughed at the right moments. She listened more than she spoke. And when James mentioned Min-jun, just in passing, testing her reaction, her entire face softened. "I adore children," she said gently, and something in her voice sounded genuine. "They're honest. They don't pretend to be what they're not." James noticed that she didn't ask about his money first, didn't ask about his power, didn't angle for position or favor. Or so he thought. Their relationship developed slowly. Dinners at quiet restaurants. Conversations that stretched past midnight. Joanna never pushed for access to Min-jun. She waited, patient, as if understanding that a widowed father guards his child like treasure. That patience impressed James. In his world, everyone wanted something now. Joanna seemed willing to earn her place. The first time Min-jun met her, James watched with the intensity of a man examining explosives. Joanna knelt to Minjun's height, her expensive dress pooling on the floor, her smile warm. "Your father talks about you constantly," she said softly. "He's very proud of you." Minjun studied her face for a long moment, too long, really, with that solemn intensity children have when they're trying to understand adult games. "You smell nice," he said finally, honest in the way only children can be. Joanna laughed, delighted. James relaxed. For a while, Joanna began spending more time at the fortress James called home. She helped with homework, though Minjun rarely needed it. She cooked occasionally, though staff handled most meals. She bought gifts, toys, books, expensive clothes Minjun never asked for. In front of James, she was affectionate, encouraging, the picture of a woman learning to be a mother. But children notice things adults ignore. Minjun noticed how Joanna's smile changed when James hugged him too long, how her voice sharpened when James canceled meetings because of Minjun's school events, how she corrected Minjun constantly but rarely praised him. Once, when James was detained in a late-night strategy session, Minjun asked his bodyguard Uncle Gene a question that made the hardened enforcer go still. "Does Joanna like me, Uncle Gene?" Gene looked down at the small boy, choosing his words carefully. "Why do you ask?" Minjun shrugged, kicking at the floor. "She looks angry sometimes, when father plays with me, like she's waiting for us to stop." Gene reported the conversation to James. James dismissed it. "She's adjusting. Adults need time to learn how to be with children." But doubt had planted its seed. One night, after Joanna had left and the house had gone quiet, Minjun appeared in James's office doorway. He stood there in his pajamas, small and uncertain, twisting the fabric between his fingers. "Father." His voice was barely a whisper. James looked up immediately from his laptop, paperwork forgotten. "What's wrong, Minjun?" The boy hesitated, then asked the question that would haunt James for the rest of his life. "Does Joanna love you, or does she love your house?" James froze. The question was too perceptive, too cutting, too aware for a 6-year-old. "Why would you ask that?" James kept his voice gentle, but alarm bells were ringing in his head. Minjun shrugged. "I don't know. She looks at the house a lot. At your things. Not at you." James forced a smile, brushed his son's dark hair back from his forehead. "She's just getting comfortable here. This is new for her too." But that night, alone in the darkness, James replayed the conversation. He thought about Joanna's interest in his business holdings, her questions about his assets, the way she'd inserted herself into meetings with his financial advisors. He pushed the thoughts away. He was being paranoid. Sunhee's death had made him suspicious of everyone. He couldn't live like that forever. When James proposed to Joanna, he did it simply, no grand gesture, no public spectacle. They were alone in his study, city lights glittering beyond the bulletproof windows. She cried. She said yes. She held him like she'd never let go. When Minjun heard the news, he clapped politely, his small hands coming together in quiet rhythm. James noticed the smile didn't quite reach his son's eyes, but he told himself it was adjustment, not warning. That night, Minjun lay in bed, hugging his pillow tighter than usual, staring at the ceiling. He didn't cry. He just held on. James didn't see that. He was too busy believing he had finally rebuilt what was broken. He didn't know that jealousy, once planted in darkness, grows silently, patiently, and sometimes it grows toward the most innocent heart in the room. If James Sue had learned anything from building his empire, it was that the deadliest threats don't announce themselves with violence. They arrive quietly, smiling, asking to be trusted. He'd survived assassins, rival gangs, police investigations, and political betrayals. He'd built an organization so powerful that Seoul itself bent to accommodate it. But he'd forgotten the most dangerous enemy of all, the one you invite inside, the one you refuse to see clearly because seeing means admitting you were wrong. And in the world James Sue had built, where admitting weakness meant death, that was the one thing he couldn't afford to do. Until the night when silence became impossible. Until the night when a foreign waitress risked everything to scream a truth that would either save a life or cost her own. Until the night when James Sue learned that real power isn't protecting your empire. It's protecting the one person who makes you human. James Sue didn't start as a king. He started as a ghost, an orphan teenager sleeping in subway tunnels, stealing food, learning early that Seoul streets had one rule: the strong eat, the weak disappear. By 15, he was running errands for neighborhood gangs. By 20, he was the one giving orders. By 30, he controlled territory most men twice his age only dreamed of touching. His empire wasn't built on inheritance or luck. It was carved from violence, intelligence, and a ruthlessness that made grown men avoid his gaze. Gambling operations hidden beneath luxury hotels. Protection rackets woven seamlessly into legitimate businesses. Smuggling networks that moved everything the law said shouldn't exist. James Sue had turned Seoul's underground into his kingdom, and everyone who mattered either worked for him, owed him, or feared what would happen if they didn't. But power, he discovered, was the loneliest throne in the world. People bowed, but no one truly saw him. They feared the legend, not the man. And late at night, when the fortress he called home went silent, James would stand at Min Jun's bedroom door and watch his son sleep, remembering the woman who'd made him believe he could be more than a monster. Son, he had loved him when he was nobody, when his empire was just a corner and a dream. She'd laughed at his darkness, challenged his cruelty, softened his edges without breaking his strength. And then, because he'd expanded too aggressively into rival territory, because he'd chosen ambition over caution, they'd taken her from him. Retaliation, they called it. A message written in blood. Min Jun was barely 1 year old when James stood at Sun He's funeral, holding his crying son, whispering a vow through clenched teeth. "I'll make the world safer for you," he tried. Armed bodyguards disguised as school staff. A fortress with panic rooms and surveillance that tracked every breath. Teaching Min Jun chess on Saturday mornings while his office was being cleaned of blood from Friday night's interrogation. James poured everything into protection, but he couldn't protect Min Jun from loneliness. The whispers started at family gatherings. The boy needs a mother. You're raising him in a world of guns and silence. An heir needs proper guidance. Even Elder Kong, whose loyalty James never questioned, said quietly over tea one evening, "Boss, a man who rules alone looks weak, and weakness invites challenges." The night everything changed started with champagne and a woman who wasn't afraid to die. That's when Joanna walked into Club Azure like she owned the room. Most people kept their distance from James Sue, but she approached him directly, champagne in hand, confidence in her eyes. She was stunning, sophisticated, unafraid of his reputation, asking intelligent questions about his legitimate holdings while carefully avoiding his darker operations. When he mentioned Min Jun, testing her reaction, her face softened genuinely. "I adore children," she said. "They're honest in ways adults forget how to be." She didn't ask about his money first, didn't angle for power, or so it seemed. Their courtship unfolded slowly, patient, careful, Joanna waiting weeks before meeting Min Jun, earning her place with what looked like genuine effort. The first time they met, she knelt to his height, expensive dress pooling on the floor. "Your father talks about you constantly," she told him warmly. Min Jun studied her face too long, that solemn intensity children have when they're trying to solve puzzles adults hide. "You smell nice," he finally said, and James relaxed. But children see what adults miss. Min Jun grew quieter. Nightmares increased. His questions became more direct, more uncomfortable, questions James kept dismissing as a child's adjustment anxiety. His advisors mentioned Joanna's family gambling debts. Bodyguards reported her strange late-night calls. Every warning sign screamed danger, but James ignored them all. When he proposed, she cried and said yes. Minjun clapped politely, smile never reaching his eyes. That night, the boy held his pillow tight, staring at darkness, while his father celebrated finally giving him a complete family. James had forgotten the most important rule he'd learned on the streets. The deadliest enemy is the one you invite inside. Have you ever ignored a warning because admitting you were wrong felt impossible? Drop a comment below, your voice matters here. And if stories about courage, redemption, and the cost of ignoring truth move you, subscribe. Because some lessons we learn too late. The engagement ring changed everything, though it took James weeks to see it. Joanna moved through his fortress like she'd been planning the takeover for months, which he'd later realize she had. She started joining business meetings uninvited, offering opinions on territory disputes and financial investments, her voice cool and certain. She rearranged furniture in rooms that weren't hers. She dismissed household staff who'd served James for years, replacing them with people who answered to her first. When James questioned it mildly, she'd smile that practiced smile and say, "I'm just trying to help. We're building a future together, aren't we?" And because he wanted that future so desperately, he nodded and let her continue. But Minjun felt the change like winter creeping into summer. Joanna's warmth, whatever little had been genuine, evaporated when James wasn't watching. One afternoon, Minjun brought her a drawing he'd worked on for hours, a careful sketch of their family standing together beneath a tree. She barely glanced at it before setting it aside. "Your father doesn't have time for childish things," she said flatly, scrolling through her phone. "You're 6 years old, Minjun. Start acting like the son of someone important." The boy's face crumpled, but he said nothing. He was learning that silence was safer than hoping for kindness. The fever incident shattered what little trust remained between them, though James never knew the full truth. Minjun came home from school burning up, trembling, asking quietly for his father. Joanna was alone with him in the enormous house, the staff dismissed for the afternoon. She looked at the sick child with something close to contempt. "Stop being dramatic," she told him, her voice ice. "Crying is for the weak. Your father built an empire. He doesn't have time to rush home because you have a little temperature." When Minjun started crying anyway, small body shaking with fever and fear, she walked out of the room and closed the door. Uncle Jean, the bodyguard who'd protected Minjun since birth, found the boy hours later, still burning up, calling for his father through tears. Jean called James immediately, fury barely contained in his voice. When James arrived, frantic, Joanna was perfectly composed. "I was just about to call you," she said smoothly. "He wasn't this bad an hour ago." Later that week, Minjun whispered something to Uncle Jean that made the hardened enforcer's blood run cold. They were in the car, heading to school, Minjun staring out the window with those solemn eyes. "Uncle Jean," he said quietly, "Joanna told me something." Jean glanced in the rearview mirror. "What did she say?" Minjun's voice was barely audible. "She said I make father look soft. That soft men don't stay bosses. That people might hurt him because of me." Jin's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He reported the conversation to James that evening, word for word. James listened, jaw tight, but then shook his head. "She's adjusting. It's hard for her, stepping into this world." Jean didn't push further, but his expression said everything. "You're making a mistake, boss." Elder Kong was less subtle. He cornered James after a council meeting, his weathered face grave with warning. "Joanna's family owes $3 million to our rivals," he said bluntly. "Gambling debts, Lone sharks circling. She needs your protection more than she loves your son. James felt anger flash hot. You're questioning my judgment? Kong held his ground. I'm questioning hers. Desperate people do desperate things. Her family's desperation makes her dangerous. But James dismissed it, loyalty to Joanna overriding instinct. He told himself they were all being paranoid, unable to accept that he deserved happiness after Sun He's death. The breaking point came quietly, as these things do. James chose Minjun's school performance over a business dinner Joanna had arranged with her influential connections. She smiled through the school event, applauded Minjun's short speaking part, but in the car ride home, her mask cracked. If you loved me, she said coldly, you wouldn't let a child control our future. Every time you choose him, you're choosing to keep me second. James's response was immediate. He's my son. He'll never be second. Joanna's face went blank, and in that blankness, James should have seen the truth. But by the time they arrived home, she'd recovered all warmth and apologies, and he convinced himself the moment had passed. It hadn't. That night, alone in the guest room she'd claimed as her sanctuary, Joanna stared at her phone. Another call from the loan sharks. Another threat. The numbers were impossible now, compounding interest, penalties, promises of violence. She could marry James, gain access to his wealth, but there'd always be the boy. The precious Minjun who held his father's heart in his small hands. She'd tried patience, tried manipulation, tried inserting herself between them. Nothing worked. James would always choose his son. Her phone buzzed again. Another demand for payment. Joanna's expression hardened as the calculation formed, cold and clear. He'll always choose the boy, she whispered to the darkness, unless there is no boy to choose. 3 days later, she suggested the family celebration dinner, her voice bright with false warmth. We should celebrate properly, the three of us. Show Seoul we're a family. She insisted Minjun must come, that it would be good for him to see his father happy. She chose the restaurant herself, exclusive and private. Minjun felt dread settle in his stomach when he heard, but he said nothing. He'd learned that speaking up only made things worse. Have you ever watched someone ignore every warning because admitting they were wrong felt impossible? Tell us in the comments if you've been that person or if you've been Minjun, the one whose voice nobody heard. And if this story is gripping you, subscribe now, because what happens next will show you exactly how much one ignored voice can cost. The restaurant was the kind of place where silence cost more than noise. Private dining rooms with doors thick enough to swallow secrets. Crystal chandeliers casting soft gold light over white linen that had never seen a stain. Marble floors polished to mirrors. Everything pristine, elegant, expensive, the perfect stage for people who needed the world to believe they were civilized. Erica Matthews moved through the space like a ghost, which was exactly what 18 months in Seoul had taught her to be. Foreign, black, female, working service in a city where power spoke Korean and wore expensive suits. She'd learned early that survival meant staying invisible, keeping her head down, sending money home to her sick mother in Chicago, and never, ever drawing attention to herself. But when James Su's party arrived, invisibility became impossible. Erica felt the shift immediately, the way other staff stiffened, the manager's obsequious bowing, the sudden tension that rolled through the restaurant like electricity before a storm. She watched the bodyguards enter first, scanning the room with eyes that had seen violence and would create more if necessary. Then came the man himself. James Su didn't look like the monsters in movies. He looked like success, sharp suit, confident stride, handsome in that dangerous way that made people step aside without knowing why. The small boy holding his hand looked fragile beside him, dark eyes too solemn for 6 years old. And the woman in the champagne-sequined gown glided in last, beautiful and perfectly composed. every detail calculated for maximum impact. Erica understood instantly. This man owned this room, maybe this entire city. The meal was ordered with quiet efficiency. Minjun's favorite dishes, Joanna explained warmly, smiling at the boy who didn't quite smile back. Erica brought water, bread, appetizers, her movements practiced and unobtrusive. She'd perfected the art of being present without being seen. Hand steady, face neutral, ears trained to catch requests before they were spoken. But she noticed things too. The way Minjun sat rigid in his chair. The way Joanna's warmth seemed theatrical. The way James's attention split between his phone and his son, missing the tension between them. When James stepped away to take a call, hand over his other ear, voice low and commanding, Erica was refilling wine glasses at the side table. That's when she saw it. Joanna's hand moved to her small designer clutch resting on the chair beside her. Quick, practiced, barely noticeable. Her fingers emerged holding something tiny. A vial, clear glass catching the chandelier light for just a fraction of a second. Erica's breath caught. Time slowed. Joanna's hand moved over Minjun's plate, the plate Erica had just set down. Steam still rising from perfectly arranged food. A small gesture, almost nothing. Powder, fine as dust, falling like snow over rice and vegetables. Then the vial disappeared back into the clutch, Joanna's face serene, her hand reaching for her wine glass as if nothing had happened. Erica's heart slammed against her ribs. She stood frozen, crystal pitcher trembling in her hands. Her mind screamed in competing directions. You didn't see that. You couldn't have. Foreign black woman accusing Korean Mafia boss's fiancé of poisoning his son. They'll kill you. They'll make you disappear. No one will even look for you. Your mother needs you. Stay quiet. Stay alive. This isn't your problem. But a child was reaching for his fork. A child whose father had brought him here to celebrate family. A child who trusted the adults at his table. Minjun took his first bite, chewing slowly. Nothing happened. Second bite. Third. Erica felt desperate hope. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe it was medicine. Maybe she was wrong. Then Minjun's face changed. His fork clattered against china. His small hand pressed against his stomach, confusion crossing his features. Father? He whispered. But James was still on the phone, back turned. Minjun's breathing quickened, shallow and panicked. His face went pale, then gray. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled. Father! This time louder, desperate. James spun around, phone forgotten. That's when Minjun started convulsing, his small body arching violently as if electrified. He gagged, foam gathering at his lips, eyes rolling back until only whites showed. The chair crashed backward as he slid to the floor, limbs jerking, crystal glasses shattering, wine spreading like blood across white linen. Erica's body moved before her mind caught up. Everything she'd been taught about survival screamed at her to stay silent, to protect herself, to let someone else handle this. But a child was dying in front of her. A child whose life she could save with one sentence that would cost her everything. God forgive me, she thought, and then she screamed, her voice raw and shaking but impossibly loud. Your fiancé put something in your son's food. The room exploded. Bodyguards' hands flew to concealed weapons. Joanna's face drained of color, her mouth opening in practiced shock. What? That's insane. James dropped to his knees, lifting Minjun's convulsing body, voice breaking as he shouted his son's name. But Erica stood firm, hand pointing at Joanna, her whole body trembling with terror and certainty. I saw her. The powder. His plate. I saw her. James's eyes locked onto Erica, killer's eyes that had ended lives, and she knew she was dead. But then Minjun seized again, foam turning pink, and James roared, Ambulance now! Chaos descended as bodyguards surrounded Erica, one hissing, "Boss? Should we?" But James was already carrying his dying son toward the exit, whispering desperately, "Don't leave me, Minjun. You're all I have." Have you ever stayed silent when speaking up could have saved someone? Have you ever been the person who needed someone, anyone, to be brave enough to tell the truth? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story is making your heart race, subscribe now, because what happens when truth collides with power will change everything you thought you knew about courage. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. James paced the sterile corridor outside the intensive care unit like a caged wolf. His expensive suit rumpled, his hands still shaking with Minjun's blood on them. Behind the heavy doors, doctors fought for his son's life with machines and medicine and desperate competence. A nurse emerged every 20 minutes with updates that said everything and nothing, critical condition, working to stabilize toxicology running tests. James had built an empire on control, but now control meant nothing. He couldn't threaten death into submission. He couldn't negotiate with poison. For the first time since Sunhee's funeral, he prayed to a god he didn't believe in, his lips moving soundlessly, bargaining with the universe. Take anything else, just not him. The diagnosis arrived 2 hours later like a verdict. Dr. Kim's face was grave as she spoke. Deliberate poisoning, a rare compound, military-grade sedative mixed with something more dangerous. Another 10 minutes and we'd be having a very different conversation. The words hit James like bullets. Deliberate, military-grade. Someone had planned this. Someone had measured death into his son's food with precision and intention. His mind flashed to the waitress, to her shaking hand pointing, to her voice screaming the impossible truth, and he'd almost killed her for it. Erica sat in a basement 3 blocks away, surrounded by James's men, hands zip-tied behind her back, knowing these were her final hours. The concrete room was cold and bare, the kind of space designed for things that disappeared. She prayed quietly for her mother, hoping someone would tell her what happened, hoping the money she'd sent home would be enough. But even facing execution, Erica felt no regret. A child might live because she'd spoken. That had to count for something. One of the guards watched her with something like respect. "You're either the bravest woman in Seoul," he muttered, "or the stupidest." Erica smiled faintly. Maybe both. Meanwhile, James's security team pulled the restaurant footage. The private dining room cameras captured everything, multiple angles, high definition, impossible to deny. James watched Joanna's hand reach into her clutch, watched the vial emerge, watched powder fall like snow over his son's plate. His hands shook so violently he had to grip the table. The woman he'd brought into their home, the woman he'd trusted with Minjun's future, had poisoned his child with the cold calculation of an assassin. And the foreign waitress who owed him nothing, who risked everything, had saved Minjun's life. James had almost killed her for telling the truth. Joanna was brought in shortly after, still wearing her sequined gown, makeup smeared from calculated tears. She denied everything at first. "This is insane, James, you know me," then deflected. "She's lying. She's jealous. She wants money." Then finally accused with venom in her voice. "She's trying to destroy us. A jealous foreign woman who wants what I have." But the investigation team had already pulled her family's financial records. $3 million in gambling debts to James's rivals. A pattern of seduction. She'd attempted this with another boss 2 years prior, failed, moved on. Text messages to loan sharks. Calculations written in her own hand. She hadn't loved James. She'd needed him. And Minjun was simply an obstacle to be removed. When Minjun finally woke, his voice was barely a whisper. James leaned close, tears streaming freely. "Father," Minjun breathed. "She told me I was in the way, that you'd be better without me." Something inside James shattered and reformed simultaneously. The violence he was capable of met the love he was capable of, and both burned equally fierce. His son had tried to tell him. Uncle Gene had tried to warn him. Even Elder Kong had spoken plainly. But James had chosen comfort over truth, had chosen his plan over his son's voice. That ended now. The underground tribunal convened in a warehouse on the edge of James's territory. His counsel demanded blood. Joanna's for the betrayal, Erica's for the public disrespect. James sat at the head of the table, Minjun's whispered words still echoing in his mind. Erica was brought in, walking with dignity despite her terror. She testified clearly, every detail, never wavering even when council members sneered. Joanna's defense was chilling in its sociopathy. I did it for us. The boy makes you weak. A boss who loves is a dead boss. She truly believed she was justified, that eliminating a child to secure her position was logical, even romantic. James's verdict was swift and brutal, understood by everyone present but never spoken aloud. Joanna's screams were cut short by soundproof walls. Then came the second decision, what to do with the witness who'd humiliated them publicly. The council wanted her dead. James stood slowly, his voice cutting through the murmurs. She saved my son. This woman has more honor than half this room. Touch her, you answer to me. Have you ever realized too late that the person trying to save you was the one you were about to destroy? Have you ever been Erica, speaking truth and expecting death? Tell us in the comments. And if this story is showing you what real courage looks like, subscribe now. Because what happens when a man built on violence chooses a different path, that's the transformation we all need to witness. Minjun came home from the hospital 3 weeks later, physically healed but emotionally shattered. The doctors cleared him with careful optimism. No permanent organ damage, toxins flushed from his system, vital signs stable. But they couldn't discharge the nightmares. The first night back in the fortress, Minjun woke screaming, his small body drenched in sweat, convinced the food at dinner had been poisoned, convinced his father would leave him, convinced safety was just another lie adults told children. James held him through the terror, rocking him like he had when Minjun was a baby, whispering promises he'd broken before but wouldn't break again. I'm here. I'm listening now. Your voice matters most. The words felt inadequate against the damage he'd allowed, but they were all he had. The decision to arrange therapy came with resistance from every direction. In James's world, showing vulnerability was weakness, and weakness invited challenges. Elder Kong said it plainly during a private meeting. Boss, people are talking. They say you're letting a woman's betrayal make you soft. Therapy for the boy looks like you can't handle your own family. James met his advisor's eyes with something new, not rage, but resolve. Let them talk. My son nearly died because I didn't listen when he told me he was afraid. I won't make that mistake again. The psychologist was vetted, protected, paid extremely well, and given one clear instruction. Help Minjun find his voice again. The sessions were slow, painful, filled with drawings of monsters in beautiful dresses and questions about whether love always came with fear. But gradually, week by week, Minjun began naming what terrified him. And James sat in on every session, learning what he should have known all along. That protection isn't about armed guards and fortress walls. It's about making your child feel safe enough to tell you the truth. Erica's situation was complicated in ways that kept James awake at night. She'd saved Minjun's life, but in doing so, she'd humiliated Joanna's family publicly, exposed their desperation, and made powerful people lose face. Joanna was gone, but her relatives wanted revenge. Erica couldn't return to her old apartment, too exposed. Couldn't leave Seoul safely, they'd find her at the airport. Couldn't resume normal life, she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. James arranged everything quietly. A secure apartment in a building he owned, rotating security that didn't look like security, legal immigration status that couldn't be challenged, and compensation that would cover her mother's medical bills for years. But when they finally sat down to talk, really talk, the power imbalance hung between them like smoke. "You don't owe me this," Erica said carefully, sitting across from him in a cafe where bodyguards watched from a distance. James studied her face, the woman who'd risked everything for a child she didn't know. "I owe you everything," he replied honestly. "And I hate that this debt exists, because it's not one you can ever repay or I can ever settle." Erica nodded slowly. "I didn't do it for repayment. I did it because staying silent felt like dying." Something in her words struck James deeply. That's what my son was doing, dying silently, and I was too proud to hear it. They sat in uncomfortable honesty, two people who'd crossed impossible lines, her speaking truth to power, him realizing his power had nearly destroyed what mattered most. No romance bloomed between them. The imbalance was too great, the circumstances too broken. But respect grew, and sometimes respect is the more honest foundation. The question Minjun asked 2 months later cut deeper than any blade James had ever faced. They were sitting in Minjun's room, sunlight streaming through bulletproof windows, when the boy looked up from his drawing and asked quietly, "Father, why did you believe her instead of me?" James felt his throat close. He could have deflected, could have made excuses, could have protected his ego. Instead, he knelt before his son and spoke the truth. "Because I was wrong. Because I wanted something so badly that I stopped listening to the person who mattered most. Your voice should have been the loudest one in my life, and I made it the quietest. I'm sorry, Minjun. That will never happen again." The boy studied his father's face for a long moment, then nodded solemnly, accepting the apology he deserved years earlier. James's transformation rippled through his organization like an earthquake. He announced at a council meeting that he was restructuring, stepping back from street-level violence, creating distance from the bloodiest operations. "The boy comes first," he said simply, and the shock on his advisors' faces told him everything about how far he'd strayed. His men questioned his strength. Rivals tested his resolve. When a shipment was attacked by a competing family, James's enforcers demanded immediate, brutal retaliation. But Minjun was in the next room doing homework, and when he wandered in asking, "Father, will people die because of what happened?" James looked at his son, then at his men, and chose differently. "We negotiate," he said. "Violence is the easy answer. I'm done with easy." Elder Kong pulled him aside later, voice heavy with concern. "Boss, they're saying you're becoming soft." James smiled faintly. "No, I'm becoming a father." Erica found her own transformation, protected but purposeful. She started teaching other foreign workers in Seoul about their rights, about safety, about speaking up when silence felt safer. She partnered with advocacy groups, shared her story carefully, became a voice for the voiceless. When James learned about it, he offered funding. "Not charity," he clarified. "Investment. What you're building matters." Together, they created something unexpected, a foundation protecting children in criminal families, offering therapy access, providing exit strategies for those who wanted different lives. Minjun's drawing became the logo, stick figures holding hands under the words, "Safe Place for All Kids." The real test came on an ordinary Tuesday. James was scheduled for a critical meeting about territory expansion when Minjun appeared in the doorway, soccer ball in hand, asking shyly, "Father, can we play?" James's phone was already ringing, urgent, important, the kind of call that moved millions. He looked at the phone, then at his son's hopeful face, and made the choice that mattered. "They can wait," he said, silencing the call. "You can't." That evening, as sunset painted Seoul in gold and shadow, James watched Minjun sleep peacefully, No nightmares tonight, breathing steady and sure. He whispered into the darkness a promise that felt like prayer. I'll build you a world where power protects, not destroys. Where listening matters more than commanding. Where your voice is the one I hear first. Have you ever ignored someone's truth because admitting they were right meant admitting you were wrong? Have you ever been the voice nobody listened to until it was almost too late? Tell us in the comments, your story matters here. And if this journey showed you that redemption isn't about erasing the past but choosing differently every single day, subscribe now. Because the most powerful transformations don't come from strength, they come from finally learning to listen.